great Cenk Uygur of my parent channel, TYT. Cenk, how's it going, man?
Great. How you doing, Kyle?
I'm doing good, man. I'm doing good. So let's get to some fun here, because I think you and I agree on many things in this whole Affleck-Harris-Marr debate on Islam. But I often describe myself on this particular issue as right in the middle between the whole Greenwald school of thought or Reza Aslan school of thought, or even you could throw like Noam Chomsky in the mix with that. I'm between them and the new atheist school of thought. So I actually think that they're both right in the conversation, and what they're saying is not mutually exclusive. But let me lay out for you what I mean, and then you can tell me where you disagree. See, I think it's just a matter of where you put your focus and what you harp away on. So, to me, I think that the atheists, if they just made more clear that they understand why liberals are so quick to defend Muslims, that people would listen more. And what I mean by that is, like, all the things that happen in the U.S., for example, how, you know, Greenwald's story with the NSA, how the NSA basically admits that they spy on moderate Muslims as if they're terrorists, or we have Bob Beckel on Fox News talking about how we should ban Muslim immigrants into the U.S. Because of the Boston bombing. So there's so many clear examples of basically crazy comments that genuinely are Islamophobic, and I think if the atheists kind of brought that up, like if they said, hey, 56% of the terrorist attacks in the U.S., according to a Department of Homeland Security study, it's right-wing terrorists. So in the U.S., the problem is the right-wingers, okay? If they said that, and then they said everything else they say about, hey, this whole Islam thing is a problem, okay, and the polls are scary and they're bad and we condemn them. If they said that first, then I think liberals would listen more. Do you agree with me on that?
The only problem with that is that I agree 100%. So I'm not sure that we're going to get fiery disagreement on that. So, look, let me go a little further. I think that they don't say that because they do think it's the Muslims. And so that gets to the core of my disagreement with them. It's not like they're wrong about Islam. It's not like I don't criticize Islam or Greenwald doesn't or Chomsky doesn't criticize religions. I mean, I don't think they're going to really out-atheist Chomsky. It's that they seem to focus on Islam in a way that allows for gross generalizations that leads to the problems that you're alluding to, right? And I'm afraid, I don't know, but I'm afraid that they're doing it on purpose. That they really don't think that Christianity and Judaism and all other religions are as bad as Islam. And that they have internalized that the Muslims are the worst. Like, they're savvy enough to not write that sentence, right? But everything they say leads to that conclusion. Islam is the worst. A lot of Muslims believe in Islam literally. Look at the polls. The Muslims actually believe this. They believe it more than the Christians do, more than the Jews do. They just don't say the last sentence, although it's running through everybody's head. Oh, hence, the Muslims must be the worst.
Okay, so let me push back a little bit here, because while I agree in parts, I do think that Harris is right on some issues, and there's been a lot of people unfairly criticizing him, and possibly I'd put you in this category, but you tell me if you agree or not. See, I think if you take the sentiment, just the general sentiment of the entire Muslim community, if you could somehow poll all 1.6 billion and compare that to if you poll all the Christians in the world, do you agree that it's likely true that overall Muslim community is more conservative than the overall Christian community?
Probably not. So
really?
That's really tricky. So if you'd really have to bore down into the details, Kyle, of what you're saying, right? So if you said, do you think that Muslims in general are more conservative on the issue of apostasy? I would agree with that. Yes. Okay. If you get into the details of what percentage of Muslims agree with that and what do they mean by that, and would they actually carry out anything related to that, any actions related to that. Those are all separate issues, right? But we are letting the Christians and the Jews off the hook way too much. And there's two reasons for that, right? First of all, I think the Christians are literalists. There's 32% of this country is evangelical Christian. If you ask them, they say the Bible is the inerrant word of God. It is, every word in there is true. But we all dismiss that like, come on, they don't really mean it. Because they're our neighbors. We know them. They're not crazy. They don't really mean it, right? But Muslims, I don't know them. And they seem really scary and they got a lot of beards. So when they say the Quran is the inerrant word of Allah, then we believe them. I mean, that's what Sam says all the time. Hey, they keep saying it. You got to believe it. But look, I mean, there's millions, tens of millions of Christians in this country who keep saying inerrant word of God, inerrant. Why don't we believe them? I think those are the most dangerous lunatics in the world because they are actively rooting for Armageddon. I mean, there is not an Armageddon cult in Islam. There are other really damaging parts of Islam. We're not blind to that. Obviously, we see that, right?
But Cenk, go ahead.
But we're letting the Christians off the hook, and we're letting the fundamentalist Jews off the hook, who are actively, absolutely destroying the peace process in the Middle East. And then that leads to the second part of this, which is that, look, it's not that the Muslims that are doing the violence in today's world do it because they're Muslim. Is it because is religion aiding and abetting their violence? Yes, right? But they would do the same thing if they were Christians and Christians were in the situation that they're in. If the Muslims had the drones and had the fighters and had the nukes, and they were constantly invading Christian countries, and there was a Christian country that was not allowed to exist, you know what the Christians would do? They would do beheadings, they would do stonings, they would do suicide bombings, and yes, fundamentalist Christianity would aid and abet that process. So that's why I'm against religions. But it's not because Islam is any worse than Christianity that they do this. It's because of the situation that they find themselves in. That's not making an excuse for them. That's explaining the process.
See, but here's the thing. At one point there, you were talking about how, Americans let Christians off the hook with their violence. And I totally agree with that, and I'm with you. And I want to point out all of the ridiculous violence that the Christians do. But I also, at the same time, I don't want to do what I think a lot of liberals are doing, which is they downplay Islamic violence. Now, I want to give you a few examples, so you know I'm not just saying that as a broad generalized thing, like sometimes you could argue Harris does. What I mean by that is, I spoke about this recently on my show, how when the whole Muhammad cartoon thing happened, there were many liberals who stood with the Muslims on that in Europe, and they said, this is hate speech, don't do that. And to me, I look at it like, well, what if Pat Robertson said, how dare you draw a picture of Jesus, or Pat Robertson did something like that in the U.S., I think all the liberals would say, you're a fucking old idiot, shut the fuck up. But for whatever reason, when it's Islam, and actually, again, I know why liberals get very touchy on this issue, because there are many examples where there is legitimate persecution of Muslims in the U.S., and I'm right there with you pointing out that the persecution against them. But I do think sometimes they over-defend. So another example is the whole Ayan Hirsi Ali thing, giving a speech at a college. When liberals stand up and they say, we don't want her to speak because we disagree with her, you're no longer being liberal at that point. You're censoring people, and you're doing what the conservatives do. I mean, another example, there was a Katy Perry music video where there was some necklace that had some Islamic symbol on it, and then a whole bunch of Muslim groups condemned it and said, censor that part of the video, take it out of the video. And liberals sided with them. Many liberals did. Of course, I'm sure you didn't, I wouldn't, and a whole bunch of others wouldn't, but there are many people who would side with them because they say, oh, listen to them, you're doing some sort of hate speech and you're offending their religion. But if it was Pat Robertson and Christian fundamentalists, then they'd be all over it. So what I want to do is not let anybody off the hook. And look, you're right about how politics leads into it and economic situations feeds into violence. Of course, absolutely. But when people go as far as like C.J. Whirlman said on your show the other day that it's only because of politics, okay, and he even said that suicide bombing is done, they say it's done for altruism. This is why people were facepalming, Cenk. That's why there was like an 80% dislike rate on that video.
No. Okay, let me break it down one by one, if I can remember all the different examples. So, number one, Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins, yada, yada. I guess we're calling them the new atheists, whatever. I don't know what to think of that title. And I don't like them taking the mantle of atheism, because I think that I'm a more hardcore atheist in that sense than they are, because I think they like to pick favorites among religions, whereas I don't, okay? I think that they always talk about how they get misrepresented. What about liberals getting misrepresented? I don't know any liberal that said, oh, yeah, the Muslims should threaten to kill people. I don't know. Kyle, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know a single liberal that was in favor of Muslims saying that the Danish cartoonist guy that it's not a big deal that Muslims say he should be killed. Can you name a single liberal who said that?
Well, articles I read at the time.
Okay.
Not prominent.
They're a tiny minority, Kyle, and it's totally misrepresenting liberals to say that that's in any way representative of liberals. Okay. No, of course we condemn the Muslims saying that the cartoonist should be killed. I said that 1,000,000 times on our show. I showed the cartoon on the current TV show. We had a big debate as to whether we should or not. And I said, yeah, of course we should, right? So I don't see, the tough guy, new atheists or whatever they are, right, taking the kind of risk that we're taking, right? And being as out there and criticizing Boko Haram before anyone else, ISIS before anyone else. On the Katy Perry issue, we made fun of the Muslim fundamentalists on the internet.
No, you did. I'm not talking about you, Cenk. Cenk,
right.
You did. I'm not talking about you.
No, I understand that, Kyle, but I think that there's overgeneralizations about, like, softy liberals who don't want to criticize Muslims. That's not true. I think liberals generally definitely criticize Muslim fundamentalists as they criticize Christian fundamentalists. What they don't do is go above and beyond and imply that it's a vast number of Muslims. It's most Muslims. Watch out for all the Muslims. It's a vast number, and they all look alike. I can't really tell, so let's go ahead and make generalizations. See, that's a liberal position where you say, hey, don't be stupid, don't make generalizations.
But, Cenk, when I talk, I do see what you're saying, but at the same time, when I talk about, I do it probably every day on my show where I'm telling a story about some jackass thing that Rick Perry or Rick Santorum or John Boehner or somebody did. And then I'll say something like, these conservatives are out of line. And when I say that, people don't think I'm talking about, Uncle Jeffrey, who is just owns a small business and votes Republican. They know it's not that broad. And I do think that while there is legitimate criticism of Harris, especially on his Israel-Palestine position and how he's much more interventionist and hawkish than any of us are, I do think that there is, not from you necessarily, but I do think there's this sort of mischaracterization of his beliefs where people think he's being harsher than he actually is in his criticism.
Well, we're going to sort that out. I'm interviewing him on Wednesday, and of course I'll ask him about that. And we'll try to get to his intent and what he means and make sure that he's not misrepresented, because he'll be here and he'll be able to discuss that at length, right? And I have genuine questions about that. And some people are billing it as a debate or something. It's not a debate. This is not a debate. This is a conversation where, yes, sometimes, as you can tell, I get heated, right? But that's what I do on the show as well, right? But it's not. It's just to make the points that we're making so that we understand one another. So I don't want to prejudge what Sam's going to say or what he thinks about it. Let's just talk that through, and we'll do that, next week, Wednesday. The video will be up on Thursday. But let's go back to Whirlman, because I do want to address all the things you brought up.
Okay.
You said that, sometimes he said that suicide bombers do it out of altruism. Now, I think you guys are totally mischaracterizing what he's saying, okay? So I think what he's saying there is that they are doing this in a way to gain significance in their lives. They think, I'm doing this for my community, let's say to free Palestine or to fight against the infidel who invaded Iraq, etc. So he's not saying they're good guys. He's saying,
no, I know that.
Warped mind, they're doing it for their community and so that they can feel significant. I don't think that's wrong. I think that's totally right.
But but do you agree with me though that when he makes the claim that it is all political, that he's wrong, because there's obviously a religious component to it, even if it's just the vessel by which they're expressing political anger. The fact that religion is the casing in it, it's religious, no?
Yes and no. So yes, you're absolutely right that religion is the vessel, and religion excuses their behavior, encourages their behavior, and that's one of the reasons that I fight against religion, okay? Mm-hmm. On the other hand, I think what CJ is driving at there is saying, fill in the blank on religion. That the root of the problem is political, and it could have been that they were Catholics, it could have been that they were Muslims, it could have been that they were anything, right? Now that's when people go, no way, no way, no way, and that's when people come out and either inadvertently or purposely say, no, the Muslims are the worst. But that's where we say, no, wait a minute now, look, Catholics did it in Northern Ireland, Tamils did it in Sri Lanka, Buddhists are doing it in Myanmar today, and the Muslims are doing it in the Middle East, okay? Now you say, well, yeah, the Buddhists in Myanmar, they don't do it as much as the Muslims in the Middle East, but that's partly because they're not constantly being invaded. So yes, you can make some arguments about how the Tibetan monks are better because of the philosophy behind their religion, and then you get into gradations, etc. But the overall idea is, when people are powerless and they feel they have no significance and they have no advantage in weaponry, what they have done throughout history is resort to violence and terrorism, and often in the cloak of whatever religion they happen to be in. That's the point.
No, I totally agree with that. But let me make just real quick. I want to ask you if you buy into this distinction that I'm going to make here. And by the way, when I make this distinction, I'm not making a value judgment. I'm just trying to explain something as I think it exists in reality. So, a charitable interpretation of Harris on this particular issue would be like, for example, when he talks about, and I do think that you're right when you say that he thinks Muslims are worse. But if you want to interpret that in a charitable way, okay, I think what he's trying to say is that, and especially I think a guy like Maher definitely says this, maybe Harris a little bit less. Of course, there is probably the biggest problem in the world today is American imperialism, okay? For sure. I mean, if you count the dead bodies, okay, and you count the places invaded, and you count the domination, there's no question that American imperialism is by far and away the worst. And that's definitely relevant to the conversation of how violent or savage or whatever a certain group is. But at the same time, is Harris wrong when he says something like, specifically internationally, okay, specifically in the name of religion, statistically, Muslims do it more in the name of religion? Is he wrong when he says that? And again, I agree on the state violence point that the U.S., military interventions and our imperialism, that is the worst, for sure. And you count up the dead bodies, we're the worst, right? But is he wrong to make that specific point?
So let me say that in two layers. So first of all, he's not factually incorrect. The problem is the implication that comes along with it, especially in terms of policy. Okay? And so if, for example, Sam left it at, hey, the tenets of Jainism are clearly less violent than the tenets of Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. It's impossible to disagree with that. I don't disagree with that. I think that's totally true, right? Mm-hmm. But he doesn't leave it there. I mean, first of all, any distinction between Christianity and Islam is, on the text, is absolutely incorrect to say that Islam is worse. The Bible is drenched in blood. It's the most lustfully genocidal book there is. So now the Quran is, I don't know if it's 99% there or 101% there, but that distinction is irrelevant. Do you see what I'm saying? Okay. Mm-hmm. So yes, you can make a distinction with some religions, but you can't among the people of the books. If you think you can read the Old Testament, you're 1,000,000% wrong. Okay. So now in terms of the practice, yes, I believe that the Muslims are acting in a way that is on a micro level more violent than, for example, the Buddhists on average. Right? Right. And I say micro level as in they do a suicide bombing in Karbala, whereas we do an invasion of Iraq. That's a macro level state violence, right? Right. Yeah. So, but I think the reason that they are doing that statistically higher amount of violence in the name of religion is because of the socio-political condition that they're in. So if the entire Middle East was filled with Buddhists, if the entire Middle East was filled with Christians, then the Christians would be the ones doing it, and probably the Buddhists would be the ones doing it.
No,
if you
I totally agree,
James wouldn't do it as much, I hear you out on that.
Cenk,
right?
I totally agree, man. I totally agree. But I think both points are true, though, don't you?
Yeah, but I concede that. That's not even a concession.
Oh, okay.
I agree. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh, great.
So
see, that's
think,
the thing.
And Kyle, one more thing about that.
Yeah.
And that's why I love having conversations like this to sort things out. Because I think people think that I'm saying that Muslims are not any more violent statistically today in the world. I get it. On the micro level, on the beheadings, the bombings, of course, I understand that. We're not blind to facts. The question we're talking about is, why is it that Islam is a particularly horrible and evil religion, and what do you do about it? How do you alleviate that? And certainly by generalizing about most Muslims, you don't alleviate it, you make it worse.
Yeah, so I think you're right about, I don't know how much it helps in trying to get people to your side when you frame it in the way that the new atheists do. You know what I mean? But because it's almost like it's more of a berating kind of thing as opposed to saying, well, look at the fertile in which this thing has sprouted. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think it's artful in terms of a strategy, in terms of getting people to your side, broadly speaking. But at the same time, again, I want to be clear here. Like I've maintained from the beginning, I do think that both sides are right. So let me just say I'll reiterate real quick, and then I'll give you the last word here. I feel like O'Reilly the way I just said that. I'll give you the last word.
No, you'll be clearly like O'Reilly when you don't give me the last word. That's
so,
right. Keep going.
Here's why, I think both sides are right. I think that the liberals are 100% right, and they do a service when they talk about how it's just a fact that when you look at how Muslims are treated, specifically in the U.S. today, but in many other places as well, that they are extra demonized and they are victims in many respects for the reasons I stated before. And we do give a pass in the U.S. to the Christian terrorism, the KKK, the neo-Nazis, the sovereign citizens, the patriot militias, and all these groups, for sure. So liberals are right to talk about that. But I do also think that the atheists are definitely right to harp away on the idea that Islam and religion in general is very, very dangerous, and we should all reject it. And I don't want, that's the thing, I don't want the liberals to over-defend to the point where you do, the old Bill Maher line, where people are too tolerant to the point where they tolerate intolerance.
Yeah, I just don't think that's a real danger, and I don't think that's what liberals are doing. I agree. I'm sure that some liberals out there in the world do that, but overall, I don't see liberals being soft on Islam. I don't see them not recognizing the facts on the ground. So I think this is a straw man that has been fictionalized. I don't think you're in the middle of anything, Kyle, honestly. I think based on our conversation, we agree almost completely, right? So if people think that I disagree that, religion is encourages, aids, and abets this violence, they're totally wrong. My beef with the new atheists so far in this conversation is that they don't say religion. They generally blame all religions for a lot of things, and then when they talk about violence today, they talk almost exclusively about Islam. And I think that is wrong. I think it's counterproductive.
Great conversation, Cenk. I really appreciate your time.
All right. Thank you, Kyle.
All right, man. Have a good one. Take care.
All right. You too, man. Take care.